If there's anybody out there putting out the quality and quantity of documentaries that PBS is, I'd like to know who they are because I haven't found them. This month we have a huge new batch of documentaries from PBS. They're all an hour-long documentary. Most of these DVDs don't include any special features, but then again, documentaries like this aren't really the type of discs that require extra features. I mean, unless there's some interviews or footage that didn't make it into the film itself, extra features really aren't that necessary. So I'm not going to count points off against them for not having extra features. But here we have a pretty interesting collection of documentaries. First up, we have The Spill, which looks at the catastrophic Gulf Coast oil spill of last year. Now, of course, this whole saga is not entirely over, but clearly there's a lot that we know about what happened now in the Deepwater Horizon and what happened in the Gulf and who's to blame and who's not. And The Spill looks at the whole picture in an hour. I mean, it's not the most in-depth documentary ever. It does not look at every single aspect of every portion of this disaster, but it does give you a really good overview of the BP Gulf oil spill, how it started, what happened, who's to blame, and really talks about some of the questions behind the BP side of things and where their blame lies and what they're going to do about it in the future. It's a pretty interesting documentary. It does spend a little kind of more time in interviews with sort of people, executives and government people and safety experts, and I would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more focus on the spill itself and kind of the Deepwater Horizon side of things. I think a lot of people still would like to know more about how that platform ended up at the bottom of the ocean. But all in all, a very interesting documentary that looks at one of the most important events, probably the most important event of last year, and possibly one of the most important events of this century so far. I mean, we really have yet to see what the long-standing effects of this spill are going to be. So this one sort of starts to open some questions about that in the running time that it has of an hour. Next up, we have 2 episodes of Secrets of the Dead: Ship Mutiny and the Silver Pharaoh. Now, I personally would rather see these released in like season collections or at least multi-episode volume collections, because again, they're an hour long each. This is a great show, Secrets of the Dead. There's a bunch of episodes of it out there, so I'd rather see collections rather than single episodes. But that being said, these are both very interesting. Ship Mutiny is based on the famous Meerman slave ship mutiny from 1766, in which case a Dutch crew was overpowered by a complement of 200 slaves that were traveling on board the ship and forced to turn around. The whole thing ended up with the ship crashed off the coast of Cape Town, and it is quite an interesting story, and really, in this film they try to piece together what happened exactly, how the slaves overcame their Dutch masters, and how the ship ended up crashing. And of course, with documentaries like this, you always get pretty solid answers. You never get concrete answers, but it is a fascinating look at an interesting event from past history, and the fact that it's narrated by the super talented Liev Schreiber, of course, is just a bonus. So definitely worth watching. Again, I have a hard time recommending running out and buying every single one of these, as I'd rather wait and see them collected into a nice box set or something. But if you're a teacher, an educator, or just a documentary or history buff, this is certainly one of the more interesting episodes and worth checking out. Now, The Silver Pharaoh, also narrated by Liev Schreiber, I believe the whole series is, it focuses on a lesser-known pharaoh that was discovered inside a silver sarcophagus in Egypt in 1939, and why he is not nearly as known as like Ramses or King Tut or some of the more famous pharaohs, and just exactly who this pharaoh was and how important he was, and why he's the only pharaoh who's ever been discovered inside an actual silver sarcophagus. Again, answers solid, not concrete, but an interesting look at a very interesting period of time, and I've always had a kind of fascination with that whole ancient Egypt thing, so this is an interesting one for me to watch. Next up, we have A Murder of Crows, which is actually available both on Blu-ray and DVD. I'm not entirely sure why this particular film they felt needed to appear in high definition. There's some great footage of birds, all crows, of course, and this documentary really looks at crows and kind of the secret life of crows, if you will. They're a much smarter animal than I think people give them credit for, and this documentary really shows how different crows are from so many other birds out there, how smart they are, how social they are, how familial they are, how much of a family-based animal they are. And we get a lot of interviews with crow experts and a lot of footage of crows and doing some things we've never seen them do before. It is a very interesting look at a bird that I think most people tend to just ignore. And maybe that's why PBS felt the need to put it out on Blu-ray. The Blu-ray, of course, looks a little bit better. You get some crisp and clean imagery, a nice upgrade over DVD. Nothing so spectacular you have to rush out and buy it on Blu-ray versus DVD. Of course, I always prefer Blu-ray, so if you have the capability, I suggest picking that one up. But again, it's an hour long, no extra features, and this film is narrated by Nora Young, not Liev Schreiber for a change. Next we have Top Secret Rosies, a look back at some of the unsung female heroes of World War II. And this is a story of 6 women who were tapped to become the first programmers of the first electronic computer developed to aid in the Army's calculations of assaults on Europe and bombings on Japanese strongholds and things like that. It was this group of women that were recruited as basically human computers. And it looks at this small group of women that worked at the University of Pennsylvania in this sort of computer capacity and how they helped program this first machine that started to take over from actual human programmers. It's an interesting enough subject. It's not the best of the documentaries of this entire group, but I think, of course, World War II buffs will find it interesting. And it's good because it's a story that hasn't been told a lot. I mean, I think there's a ton of war documentaries out there, especially World War II. I don't think there's any shortage of footage or interviews about World War II. So this is kind of nice to get a look at a different side of World War II, and especially the fact that there's sort of a female empowerment vibe behind it is great to see that you know, war documentaries so often focus on male protagonists and male subjects. It's nice to see some of the women that were part of the war effort get their due. So in that respect, this is a great documentary. It certainly is interesting enough to watch. Not my favorite, though, in terms of sitting down and watching a large group of documentaries, not the single most captivating of all of them, but certainly worth watching again if you're a history buff or a World War II buff. Finally, we have Death by Fire. This is a look back at, of course, Texas's death penalty, which, as we all know, Texas likes to execute people. And it's a 2004 execution of convict Cameron Todd Willingham, who was convicted for the arson deaths of 3 of his young children. Interestingly, I just caught this special on TV not that long ago, and or I caught part of it, I should say, and I only got to watch a little bit of it, so it was nice to be able to watch the entire thing. It's a very interesting story. Again, when you have someone who's been executed and you're trying to prove his innocence, it's tough to do that in a documentary to definitively prove somebody's innocence, although they certainly do make a very strong case. This is clearly one of those cases where you have to look at execution in a state like Texas and wonder if maybe they don't do things a little bit too freely, not as much by the book as things could be. It certainly is not as powerful a documentary as something like the classic Thin Blue Line, but it's a solid look at an interesting case that, of course, could be rather tragic if this person was actually innocent, as it seems that he was. Once again, no extra features on the DVD, but interesting. Again, I don't know this is the type of thing that people are going to rush out and buy, but if, like me, you watch part of it on TV and you want to see how it ends, it is available. Or again, if you're an educator and looking at social issues, this is a perfect way to tackle the death penalty and executions in general. So again, a very large collection of excellent titles from PBS, some really solid documentaries with some real standouts among them.